All right, we are 2 after, so go ahead and get started. Everyone else can, if there's more people, they can filter in as we get started. So hello again, everyone. My name is Laura Nagel. I am the VP of Product here at StackHawk. And we today are doing an office hours around our recent launch of deeper API security testing. So today, again, is kind of a different format. So it's not a traditional webinar. It's a little more casual. And I'm excited to have on with me today the lead engineers from all of that new functionality that launched. I'll intro them in a second, as well as our solutions architects. So we hope that this time can be really an interactive time. Hopefully you have read the blogs, watched the previous webinar, and have a sense of what the new functionality is. And then this is a time to really ask the engineers in our essays some of those questions about troubleshooting, getting it working for you, your unique test cases, etc. So on with me, I'm just going to go clockwise around. I've got Dana White, who was the lead engineer for custom test scripts, Austin Paragon, who is the lead engineer for our deeper, custom test data. I've got to make sure I get everybody right. Sam Bolin, who is the lead engineer for our custom scan discovery. And then Zachary Conger and Eric Potter, who are solutions architects. And in the background, we've got Nicole Jones, our product marketing manager, who is helping logistically run everything for us. So we thank Nicole, even though she is off camera. So what we're going to do today is each of the engineers is going to do a quick demo just to refresh everybody on the functionality, and then we're going to open it up for Q&A. We have some questions that came in ahead of time that we can answer, and then please feel free to type your questions in, and we will answer them either via the chat, or we'll have somebody jump on and answer them live. All right, I think we're going to start with Sam and custom scan discovery.
Hello there, friends. I'm Sam Volin, full stack software engineer at StackHawk, and I'm going to show off the custom scan discovery. So the power of custom scan discovery is that this enables software developers and security teams to reuse their favorite software development tools alongside HawkScan to discover their web applications. As part of this today, I'm going to demo custom scan discovery with Cypress. Cypress is a wonderful front-end testing tool that allows software teams to create end-to-end test specs to be able to test portions of their UI. So today I'm going to show off, we have this StackHawk custom image repository. This is in our Kaka repo, which is StackHawk public repositories and resources. In this repository, if you'd like to follow along, you can clone down the repo and see the Cypress code that we are testing. So I'm going to switch over to my Cypress test specs here. And these are what the Cypress test specs look like, very similar to other unit testing tools. They have describe and it blocks, as well as resources for defining your own custom commands. How custom scan discovery works is it intercepts the HTTP traffic the dev tool will generate to be able to discover your web application. So in the background here, I have my Java Spring Vulny running. This is an intentionally vulnerable web app we have also documented as part of one of our public repos, and I'm going to be scanning this running web application. So real quick, if I go to localhost 9000, we'll see the UI of Java Spring Vulny, and I have here test specs that point to it and are going to attempt the various forms of authentication it provides. And so I could run Cypress locally headed with these test specs, and I'm going to run it headed. So when Cypress starts up, it brings it the UI that will show its automation attempting to run assertions against our Java Spring Vulny web application. And so it ran through a couple test specs, going through the various authentication flows, as well as specifically visiting this hidden test path. And so with custom scan discovery, as part of this, I can add a section to the HawkScan YAML config that includes the Cypress command that we would normally run on the shell. And this will be run as part of HawkScan as it runs to discover the web application. So I'm going to start HawkScan now. I'm going to start it passing in my app ID, and I'm using the HawkScan CLI, pointing to this Cypress or this Cypress StackHawk YAML config, so that it runs our custom scan discovery. Are there any questions so far?
No questions so far.
All right. I do just want to point out that this little addition is required for custom scan discovery with Cypress. This is reported in their documentation on proxying. As we see, the Cypress started up and we see the output from the spec run as part of HawkScan. And we see that it found a number of paths. These paths will also include, if we view the results on the StackHawk platform. Come on. Darn magic mouse. So in the StackHawk platform, we could see the results come in live, and we see it running through the set of plugins and checks as part of this scan. And we also see that among the paths that it found, it included our hidden Cypress path that would only be found as part of our Cypress test spec. So value this very much, that teams that have invested time in their end-to-end testing with Cypress or Selenium or other dev tools can reuse those to get started with HawkScan and discover their web applications quickly.
We had one question come in, Sam, just a quick overview. Looks like Zach has answered in the chat about what is Cypress. So yes, as Zach answered, it's a commonly used web testing framework. So teams can actually write their own test scripts with this, add their own test data. And so what StackHawk will now do is use that to drive our scanner, and we'll take in that data as well. So as Sam mentioned, this covers Cypress. We're adding support for Selenium, and we also have support for Postman collections, which we're very excited about.
Indeed. And if you would like to see examples of these tools in use in the StackHawk custom image repository, you can see these exact Cypress test specs that we have included that I'm scanning here, as well as test specs for Playwright. And we are currently working on Selenium and additional test specs for other custom scan discovery tools. But I do want to emphasize that it really is any dev tool that is generating HTTP traffic. You could use a curl command and just hit one endpoint and be able to get results from there. And we've documented this feature to the teeth. So if you have any questions, please go to docs.stackhawk.com and let us know if you get stuck at all. We're always happy to help developers achieve great success with their HawkScan journey.
Thanks, Sam. And if you have any other questions about any of the functionality as it's demoed, you can enter that in the Q&A. If you want to just have more of a conversation, we can also make anybody a panelist. So we can actually have some live conversations here. It doesn't have to be all typed Q&A. All right. With that, Austin, are you ready to show us some custom test data, custom variable injection?
Sure thing. I think I am ready. So a lot of what this demo is going to show off is going to be using a lot of the same tools that Sam just used for his demo. So a lot of it's going to look familiar. We're going to be using the same Java Spring vulnerable application. And we're also going to be looking at the platform to see some results there. So without further ado, I'll go ahead and start showing off how this is configured and how this works. So first off, what is custom test data for open APIs or REST APIs rather? So traditionally, before this last update, HawkScan was using a lot of static values to fill in your parameters for REST APIs. A lot of times those static values weren't relevant, helpful, necessary, and it would end up hitting a lot of roadblocks in your application in the sense of not exercising all the possible branches of logic. So what we did here is we started adding the ability for you to specify values you want to use. This is a great use case for testing environments where you have test users or test assets, test IDs, data like that you want to work with that exist in your system but are specifically there for testing, or just represent real data in any other shape or form. So now we can actually exercise more of that logic. So if you're familiar with scanning REST APIs and HawkScan, you know we have this existing open API conf section of our StackHawk.yaml, which is the configuration for said scanner. There's a couple new things that go in here. The most important thing, which I'll just go ahead and knock out first, is the custom variables. This is what's going to allow you to designate which parameters get which values. So I have my open API spec actually open here on the right. So some of the values that I like to fill in here is we have a search object down here defined on the components where it just has one property of the type string called search text. So what I'd like to do is whenever search text is come across in a new path in our REST spec, I would like to use one of custom search text 1, 2, or 3. Similarly, we have a lot of these get endpoints which use text as a parameter. As you can see, the text is defined once again as just a string. So I have my field text defined here, and I want to use custom text value 1, 2, or 3 whenever I come across a new path that uses that parameter. Something else that's important about this new custom test data is if you don't necessarily want to supply your own data, but maybe there's some, regex validators that make sure you're in the right format, or you passed in something relevant to what the endpoint is doing or the path is doing, is you can use the Faker library. And the Faker library is a very powerful library to help us generate a bunch of great values for this kind of stuff. So the best example I like to use is email formats. One way to leverage the email formats, which I included down here, is here's another authentication request, which we have a login endpoint on this spec. When we go to the username, the type is string, which is very standard, but I also included at this point, the type should be, or the format rather, should be email. So with the new HawkScan update, what we'll do in that REST spec is if you have Faker enabled, which is defaulted to false, so you have to enable this explicitly. But if it is enabled, when you come across this username in any request, we should actually generate an email rather than just a John Doe or random string that isn't an email. That way, if there's email validation, regex validation, we'll get past that still, even though we don't have the custom data specifically. So looking at that, I just had a scan finish up with all this. So I will bring that over and we can look at the platform as well. Let me zoom in a little bit on this, make that easier to see. Is that good? Thumbs up from my panelists if that's big enough, I guess. Okay, cool. So looking at here, the scan just finished. And if we look at the paths, we can see right off the bat that the list of paths that we use to scan this, it's already using some of those text. Remember the text parameter and the gets? It's already using custom text value 2, custom text value 1, custom text value 3. So those are places where the parameter came up in several different paths, and we used randomly a different value from that list that we provided. If you just want one value, clearly you can just give it a singleton list and it'll always use that one value. Going back over to the findings, we can see here in like the proxy disclosure, here's some similar ones where you can see we use custom text value 1, custom text value 2, etc. Here's an important one. This is the auth sign-in endpoint, which if you remember in our spec, let me go back just as a reminder, we included the format email on the username for this authentication request. So if we go look in the body of this, this represents the username right here. Ignore the redacted, that's some of our logging redaction we do. But the username field actually got a real email address. And this obviously doesn't represent a real person, but it generated a correctly formatted email address. Again, what that's going to do is help get past any regex validations. The list of formats that you can use is on our docs, included in this new custom variable section. So you know all the different options you have to use there. One more important thing about the Faker that I think is definitely worth mentioning is let's say you're in a scenario where you don't necessarily have access to the open API spec or the REST spec, and I can't just go in and start adding formats where I want those things generated. You can inject formats like a custom variable. So what you would do in that case is if I can't get to my REST spec and I still want to use emails for the username and have a new one generated each time, We have this faker prefix here, which you can use for values. And then when you use the faker prefix, $faker, colon, and then give it the desired format, we'll do the same thing. We'll come across it and we'll inject there. That also overrides the format in the rest spec. So if you wanted to use a different one that exists in the rest spec, you can also do the same thing there by injecting. But the long story short, the goal for this is to just really help make it possible for the scanner to exercise more branches of your code, try to get to more logic that it wasn't able to get to before using dumber values, for lack of a better word. So hopefully we'll be able to reach out a lot farther these days into your REST API. I didn't really stop for questions. Sorry about that. Did any questions come up? I forgot to take a breath.
So I have a question, Austin. This was from some of our questions submitted ahead of the webinar today. Can you use custom test data for password reset flows?
Sure. Actually, that's one of my favorite examples, the password reset flow. So to think traditionally in a password reset flow, one of the things you'll be providing there is a user ID along with some other information to look up the user you're trying to reset the password on. If you go into that with a user ID that doesn't exist, or 0, or something that couldn't even be possible, or not even like a string value that doesn't represent a user ID, what's going to happen? You're going to immediately get met with a 404 potentially. And before your actual password reset flow logic in your code gets exercised, the 404 is going to get kicked back and nothing actually happens with that code. Now, using an existing test user ID, we can actually get into that code using some of these other malicious inputs and try to attack more of your application and find more of those vulnerabilities. So that's a really good example of when that's a good use case.
Awesome, thank you. I also love this. I started out as a tester, and one of the best ways to find bugs is to enter data that's unexpected. So you can also use it if you want to test out those error cases and make sure that you're failing gracefully, in addition to ensuring you're executing all those paths. All right. Well, if you have more questions around the custom test data, feel free to input them in the Q&A and we can circle back around to them. So thank you, Austin. Thank you, Sam, from before, and we'll move on to Dana with custom test scripts.
Hey everyone, I am going to demo custom test scripts today. Everybody see screen okay? All right, we're gonna start off with migrating from Zap. The good news is there's not a lot you need to do from Zap if you've ever had an active script. Basically, you just click, you add your script and it'll create it for you there. And I've created this active script here based upon one of our community scripts, or one of Zap's community scripts, which is the JWT none exploit. It just is the none encoding on a JWT token. So here I've created the scripts all in here. This is the most important method, is that scan node. There's also a scan that's similar as well. And then there's this raise alert. Basically, just gives it the risk and everything and the evidence that you found it and all that sort of stuff. So to migrate this over to HawkScan itself is you just need to do a few different things. And one is you don't have to have your own thing in the scripts directory, but you create this active directory within there. That's how we know what type of script it is. You could have your authentication scripts living side by side in there as well. And so I'm going to put it in this my new test scripts. And then we are going to update it in the YAML. So first we need to actually register it. So we are going to Hawk register plugin, my new plugin. And hopefully that's the right command. And basically we get this unique plugin ID that's tied to this specific script and our company ID. It used our application ID to look up our company or organization to associate it. And now the only difference you're going to be doing in this script is adding your plugin ID right here. And that's all you need to do. And then we can go ahead and run our scan. Oh, and then there's one thing that also I love when I'm testing my scripts is we have a specific scan policy called custom scripts. This will run only your custom scripts so that you don't need to run all of a full scan. So it's great for testing, especially if you've got a JavaScript file that might fail. So as we're running this, we can see it's starting to scan, and then we can look at our results in the platform. Those are coming in. So coming in, it's basically, this one is just kind of taking your token and messing around with it and then setting it as a header token to see if we'll accept a none type encoding on our JWT token, which was incredibly hard to actually implement on our vulnerable app because nothing lets you do it anymore. So that's kind of basically the things when we're looking at our scripts thing is you need the name, and that's the fully qualified name of your script with the .js, your ID to tie it together, the type, which will also tell you what directory it's going to be in, and then their path to like Hawk scripts is where I have mine. You can put it wherever you want. And then of course the language is JavaScript that we're supporting. And now that we've hit upon this vulnerability, you have a nice little custom tag in there. So you can drill down and see all of your results. Like I had item 1, it shouldn't have been able to see that item 1 if it didn't have a correct JWT token. So now you can basically do whatever kind of custom logic you have in your custom test script. For me, I ended up modifying this to look for specific things that I knew would be in there so that you can add custom business logic rather than just having something generic. And this will run alongside any of your scans. So, sorry, that was quick. Any questions?
Hey, Dana, I have a question. So with StackHawk, we bring in a number of existing Zap plugins, but not all of them. We try and curate only the best. Is it possible with this to bring in other plugins that we may not have included?
With this one, it's more of writing custom scripts, but you could write your own custom functionality as a plugin. So you could totally just be like, well, this is what I need in mine, or I want mine to test this specific GraphQL thing. So it allows you to basically write whatever you want to test against the app. So we could for sure bring in a plugin or vulnerability we don't naturally scan for. So
Gotcha. Nice.
Yeah. And you can migrate, if you do have any Zap custom test scripts already, you can just directly migrate those over. If you have something like from Burp, you'd want to, you'd need to kind of rewrite that functionality into this format, but you now have that capability.
yep. The only difference between them is the set plugin ID, and that's it. You can just copy paste your scripts and they should work just fine.
Yes. One other question that came in through the chat just now, is it possible to create customized tests and scans? So we actually have that capability coming up this next quarter. We'll have policy management. So you'll be able to say which plugins you actually want run or which tests you actually want run in a scan. So you could only run your custom test scripts if that's what you wanted, or if you wanted to add any plugins that we don't include in our default StackHawk scan policy. So if there's like Zap Alpha test or anything along those lines, you could pull those in. So look for that functionality coming out later this quarter. One other question for you, Dana, that came in ahead of time: is there a way to list or remove plugin IDs for custom test scripts?
Well, the short answer is there will be soon. We will have, it's one of the things we're working on. It should be in the next release of the CLI as a way to list it. And then you should be able to look at it in your UI, or that's in the CLI, in the UI for our policy management. It should be there. So
yeah, so if you want to see what your custom test scripts are and potentially remove or edit any of those, that functionality is coming very shortly, imminently, I should say. All right, well, we have a couple more questions that came in ahead of time, so I'll go ahead and ask those. Again, if there's any questions, that's the end of our demos. So if there's any other questions, if you've been working with this, any of this functionality over the last couple of weeks since we launched it, you've had any questions about it or any gotchas, you have the dream team here to answer all of those questions. And we're happy we can set it up so you can just have a conversation as well. It doesn't have to be all typed. So just raise your hand, let us know. All right, so other questions that came in ahead of time. I've got one for Zach and Eric. You guys have not had to talk much, so I'm gonna call you out, put you in the spotlight. Can one of you answer what's the benefit of DAST testing over pen testing? So for those that don't know, Stack is a dynamic application security test. So what's the difference between that and a pen test?
So I'll take this one. DAST testing tools are a class of tools that pen testers will often use to analyze applications and look for security vulnerabilities. And so it's part of the testing suite for pen testers, but pen testers will often go a step further. They'll try and look for different assets your company has and try to, find hidden things like maybe public shares of S3 buckets and that sort of thing. So a pen test can be a broader scope, whereas a DAST scanner is a specific tool that a pen tester might use. And the advantage of something like StackHawk is that it's a pen testing or a DAST scanner that can be automated in CI/CD. And the real power of a utility like that is to find new vulnerabilities as they come up, as coders are developing new code. Because if you can do a scan every time a developer checks in new code, then you're scanning and you're looking at the difference between the code before that new 20 lines of code, the application before that new 20 lines of code, and then after the 20 lines of code that a developer just added. Hey, now we've got a SQL injection vulnerability. That makes it really easy to pinpoint where the problem is and get it solved really quickly before it ever gets anywhere near production. Whereas pen testing happens typically after production and maybe every quarter or year, at which point it's really difficult to go spelunking and figure out which lines of code changed to make those problems occur. And therefore you get blown up roadmaps and unhappy developers that just had to switch context back to this thing that they wrote 3 months ago.
Or longer. Or that the person that wrote it isn't on the team anymore. They've moved on to another team and someone else has to go figure it out. All that fun stuff. So we like to talk at StackHawk that security testing is just software testing, and it should occur at the same time you're testing for any other bugs before you would release software production. All right, I've got one more question for Austin. And then if there's no more questions, we'll wrap up and make it a nice 30-minute webinar here for everybody, or office hours. So Austin, for the custom test data, can I inject a user ID into my OpenAPI config for scanning?
Absolutely. User ID is probably one of the most common use cases we'll see with the custom test data, but really you're just limited to your own imagination there. If you want to be using bearer tokens, API tokens, user IDs, password reset data, dates, phone numbers, timestamps, it's all you. The world is your oyster.
All right. I think that's the case with pretty much all of these. So start your scans with pretty much any dev tool you've already invested in. We definitely highlight Cypress and Postman, but if you have others, we do have that curl capacity, so you can enter other scans. And then we have first-class support coming for Selenium shortly. And so get started scanning really quickly and a choose your own adventure way in that regard. Input your own custom test data, and also create your own custom test scripts. So if you've got that business logic or tendency checks that you want, or you just have, every app is its own little snowflake. So make sure you're covering your use cases and what's important to your organization. And with all of that, StackHawk gives you really comprehensive ways to go test your APIs for security vulnerabilities before you ship them out to production, which is what we'd all love to do. All right. One last opportunity for any questions. If not, thank you to all of our engineers. Thank you, everybody who joined us in this fun new little experiment we've got for office hours. We're hoping to do these more regularly, so look for information on the next one coming up about our new GitHub PR commenting and repo integration. All right. Thank you again, everyone. Have a wonderful day. And let us know if you have any other questions through all of our other mechanisms of chat, email, etc., found on our website. Bye.